Hey guys, welcome to Sunday Afternoon Bible School, our adult version of Sunday School, where we take a deeper dive into various biblical subjects. We are beginning a brand new subject, and it is end times. We're going to do a deep dive into end times. So this subject, of course, it fascinates a lot of people. They want to know about end times. They want to know where we are in end times. How far away are end times? Well, we're going to do a deep dive and again a study. Now, in order, before we kind of dive into it, let me set it up because eschatology, and that word eschatology simply means the study of end times. It's not that it is hard. Really, no Bible topic is hard. But end times or eschatology is exhaustive, meaning there are a lot of scriptures. And one of the main problems with understanding end times or confusion over end times is not studying all of the scriptures for you to have a good understanding. So depending on your particular theological view, and there are a lot of them, and basically let me just make this difference. There is a difference in theology or theological studies and biblical studies. Now, what's the difference? Theology is man's study of God, and I'm not here to say to deal with whether or not if it's good or it's bad. Obviously, there's both. But to understand, it is man's study of God. So if you want to go get a higher education and you want to go to a seminary or a theological school, that's what's going on. It is man's study. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're studying all the Bible. Now, biblical studies, and using that phrase, is studying the actual Bible itself. So you can do that at home. I encourage you to do that at home. Get you a good translation. And when I say good translation, that I'm going to kind of draw back on that. But just get a good reading Bible, a Bible, a reading. I have, in fact, you know what I did, but I think I gave it to my granddaughter. I had a large print Bible, and it was just that. It was just the Bible, no study notes, no nothing. And I just pick it up and just read. And you can just simply read the Bible. And let me just say this: you can read the Bible and understand its plain, simple reading. There's nothing in Scripture that God put in, in Scripture that you can't understand. Now, there's certain things you may not understand the why. So, for example, I'll just give you this example. The fact that Moses regulated slavery, you understand that, and you can understand when you read it. This is what Moses did. Now, you may not understand why he did it. Like I say, I'm not going to get into that the whole big debate, but that's just an example of what I mean. So there's a lot of things that when you read it, you can say, okay, well, here's what's stated. I may not understand why it's there, but I can walk away saying, here's what the Bible stated. So I'm not a scholar. I don't have a theological degree, but I have read the Bible from cover to cover. I've read the Bible in various translations from cover to cover. So what my expertise is the Bible, and in having read it, I could say the Bible is plain and simple, and that's what we're going to do. Now, in fact, I have on my YouTube channel, if you go to my playlist, Bible, BP, the Bible Perspective, or the Bible Plain and Simple, on my playlist, I have a whole bunch of end time study. I think like something like over 140 videos itself, or various as what we're going to do here in this series, right? So again, this I mean, and I could tell you some of the response that people have. Some good, some bad. Like usually people will say, "You don't know what you're talking about." And it will. I've even had people call me a blasphemer, a deceiver, a false teacher, but they never. And I engage and say, show me how and where I'm wrong. And so you're going to see this, that we're going to get into these scriptures, and that's going to be our only book. As a habit, I don't quote men. I don't quote commentary. Um, this here is a Bible. Okay, this is a Bible, and the reason why, and I do have Bible aids. Okay, here's the Vine Dictionary. Here is another Spottish Dictionary. Spiru. I always get his name wrong. Zuditis. Okay, same. And by the way, these are basically the same thing. Greek words, same thing. By the way, they use the same Strong's number system. Okay. I have a concordance, and I will reference these because here, this is the old school strong. I've had this for decades, which tells you my age. I have, up there some Bible stuff, Kenneth Weiss, Greek scholars and all that kind of stuff. So I benefit, of course, from the hard work of scholars, but especially when it comes to the translation. So I don't quote. The reason why I don't quote commentaries and all that because I don't base my teachings on what someone says, and that I know it's standard theological seminary sermon prep, all that, right? You have to quote somebody. I don't feel I have to, and I don't. Okay, um, and what I'm going to say is, and I rarely quote the Greek because I don't speak Greek. Again, I got Greek stuff, and I understand the value of understanding that our English translations are translated from the Greek and Hebrew. So I understand that. What I'm going to say is that since I'm neither a Greek or Hebrew scholar, the translations are more than sufficient to understand God's word. Okay, unless you tell me that whatever translation, my favorite translation is the Holman Christian Standard Translation. So if you tell me that's wrong, okay, then that you would have to prove. But again, that's a whole nother topic. But what I'm going to say is we could read, and as you will see, we are going to read the scriptures, and we can understand the scriptures plainly. Okay, so how I am going to do this exhaustive study, and you will find out once we get into it. I'm going to study in a side-by-side study Matthew 24 and the book of Revelations, the entire book of Revelations. But I'm going to do it side by side. And one of the reasons why I'm going to do it that way, and you will see, is we're going to study when Jesus says something, and then we can match it with the book of Revelations, as well as, of course, a ton of other scriptures. And you're going to see, we're going to get into tons and tons of scriptures, and especially the Old Testament prophecy. It's important to understand the Old Testament prophecy if you're going to understand what Jesus is saying, especially in Matthew 24, which we will do. Okay? And then we're going to come to what's called the church age. And this is where the rapture comes in at. And we'll deal with that when we get to that part. Because so it's going to be sort of a timeline sort of study. And then we're going to, of course, address whether or not is the rapture pre-trib, pre, mid, or post, pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-tribulation. When is the rapture going to happen? Because there's a big debate over that. I probably will get responses, and I'll address them, again when we get to that point. But you will see that people will come from their emotions. I have a video again. I got tons of videos that I've done on the rapture in time, and one particular guy, um, one particular guy called me the Antichrist. He said I was a false teacher because I believe that the rapture is going to happen before the 7-year tribulation period begins. That's it. And not only that, by the way, and I want to say that there are some, I'm not going to get into this, but I'm just going to tell you there's a pattern that I'm going to see with certain people in their responses. Grumpy old men, and they get very vicious. Some have threatened to sue me because we go back and forth, but and so it is with this guy. And in fact, the guy that I'm telling you about, he did a video. I think he did a video in response to kind of my teaching. So I did a video on his response to say, let's take a look at what he's saying. Now here's the scriptures. And he didn't take that very well. All right, so we're going to begin our study in Matthew 24. And like I say, we're going to go through and cover a lot of scriptures from a timeline perspective that you will see in real time from the scriptures. So let's do that. Let's go to Matthew chapter 24 and begin our study in end time prophecy. All right, so Matthew 24. So this chapter here, and I have to kind of set it up, and like I say, we will dive into it, and you will understand why I'm making the statements that I'm making. The Gospel of Matthew. Now, the 4 Gospels have different perspectives. Now, if you read commentaries, sometimes you read, and I don't like to read their opinions. Sometimes I think it's nonsense. I shouldn't say that because I'm not a biblical scholar. So I'll concede my last statement as being foolish. What I will say is that they have their opinion, but like, for example, you will see that they like, and like if you have a study Bible and you're going to see some of the scholastic notes or views. So for example, Paul's letter to the Romans, there's going to be theological discussions and arguments over, well, when did Paul write it? Did Paul actually write it? And they go through all of that. And let me tell you that it's probably worth the study if you want to get into those kinds of studies, okay? And so same thing with the Gospels. You got some scholars that will say that Matthew, Mark, and Luke were some of the other ones copied them because they are called the synoptic Gospels because the structure is very similar. But when you and no doubt it could be look, but there is certainly, when you actually read different ones, there's different perspectives. Okay, there's different perspectives. And of course, John's gospel is completely different. It comes at a different angle. But anyway, and which, by the way, John is much later in church history, which the book of Revelations will come into play with John's gospel. Now, the reason I'm saying all this is because Matthew's gospel, like Luke writing, was to the Gentile world. He was a Gentile. He wasn't even an apostle, but he traveled with the apostle Paul and had firsthand accounts of what Paul was saying and taught. Matthew was an apostle, of course. He was a tax collector, but Matthew's gospel is aimed at the Jewish people. And so his gospel, more than any of the other writers, have more Old Testament references, prophecies establishing Jesus as the Messiah. And so as we're reading here, we're going to see, again, that Matthew is talking to the Jewish people. And so, for example, because I am going to go to there, in chapter 23, you see Jesus rebuking, this whole entire chapter here is Jesus rebuking the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees were the religious leaders. Luke doesn't really get into this, but notice all of this he talks about his rebuke. Why? Because of their corrupting the Old Testament law, so forth and so on. So, all right. So then when he gets down to verse 37, and I want to read, I'll start at verse 33. Okay. When he says, snake, brood of vipers, how can you escape being condemned to hell? This is why I am sending you prophets, sages, scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will flog in your synagogues and hound from town to town, so all the righteous blood shed on the earth will be charged to you, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zacchaeus, the son of Barichai, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the author. I assure you, all these things will come upon this generation. Now, that's a heavy condemnation. Why? Because the Messiah appeared, and no other generation saw the works. Right? I mean, in one respect, you would think, what an awesome blessing it would have been to have actually seen the Messiah. Of course, the disciples walked with him 3.5 years, but he traveled around Judea, Galilee. So Israel saw the Messiah. They heard him, they teach him. Some of them experienced the miracles, feeding the 5,000, the 4,000, being healed by them. So this generation, no other generation saw the Messiah and then saw those works. And that's why Jesus now charged them, because this generation is the one that rejects the Messiah. So then he says, verse 37, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, she who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, yet you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate, for I tell you, you will never see me again until you say, he who comes in the name of the Lord is the blessed one. Now, I'm going to come out because I want to show you something that we're going to use and to understand the times. So let me come out of this and show you the times. And I should have had this before, but I am here we go. All right, here we go. So now this image, and we'll get to it, but I'm going to show you this and tell you this now as a prophetic timeline, okay? A prophetic timeline. All right, so let me explain. In Daniel chapter 2, now first of all, you have to kind of understand, and again, keep in mind, I'm going to get to this with the scripture, so I'm kind of jumping ahead, but this image, which is in Daniel chapter 2, which is that God gave Nebuchadnezzar this dream. So you have to understand, and this is where the Old Testament prophecies come into play. You start back in some 200 plus years before the Babylonian exile. Okay, the Babylonian exile. And this is kind of, it's going to be important to understand. When we get to the section of the Old Testament, the writings of the prophets, okay? The writings of the prophets. So the Old Testament, you have, the historical section from Genesis to, I think it's Esther, all right? And that's kind of more of a historical chart, right? From Adam, then to Israel, Moses, all of that, okay? And then the other section, of course, is the literary, the books of wisdom, Psalms, Proverbs, Job, things like that. But then that last section is what's known as the writings of the prophet. But you have to kind of understand, why do we have that section of the writings of the prophet? Okay. I can't probably do this even like this. Let me show you this, because I'm freewheeling this because I should have done this before, but I didn't. And let me see. Let me see if I can find my timeline here. And then I'm going to show you what I mean here. I'm doing this because it is important to understand this. All right. It is important to understand this. All right. This is my timeline, biblical timeline here. Let me see. Didn't want that. I don't know if y'all can see that. I want a little more. Too big. Well, let me see if I can do this. Okay, so this is I like this app here, but let me go. Um, oh, yeah, this is going to give me trouble here. And I want you to see it, because I want you to see this. All right, so this is the timeline of the Bible, the books of the Bible. You're going to see why I'm going to show you this in a moment. No, it keeps doing this to me. Here we go. So you can see the timeline on the line. You're going to see why I'm going to do this in just a moment. But you know what I'm going to do? Hold on. You know what? Rather than waste the time here, let me come out of this and do this the other way here. All right. I think I got it together here. So let's do this. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you this is just simply a table of this is a Bible timeline. Here, that's what it is. It's a Bible timeline. And so these are approximate datings of the times of the books of the Bible. Okay. But so as you can see, you start with Genesis, or if here, I like the way they do this, because you say, look, John 1 before time, right? And then you got creation, Genesis 1. And then you can see all the timeline that they have right. Now, one of the ways that they do this, okay, one of the ways that they do this, the scholars, right, they look at what's called internal and external evidence, okay? And they're fairly close. So, what was going on during this time, for example, in Genesis 12, when God sent Abram to Egypt and all that. So that's all. If you like that, they're wonderful studies, okay? So let me go down, because I want to get to the time, what's called the writings of the prophets, okay? So in this here, if you start, and this is going to give the timeline here, so it's going to be a tad different than when you kind of see it how they arrange in the Bible. The books of the Bible, are arranged pretty much in terms of the dating. Okay, the dating. So let me give you an example. Let me go over here and let's look at this here, table of contents. So this is, how our books of the Bible are arranged. Now, the first 5 books, of course, are written by Moses, and kind of pretty easy because he starts with Genesis in his writing. Then you got Joshua, and Judges, Ruth, and then 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then all the way down to Esther. I said, right? So this is what I said, the first section of the Old Testament, which would be the historical narrative, and then Job, Psalm, and then all the way down to the Songs of Psalms, okay, which would be that section, books of literature, you can say. All right. When we get to Isaiah, okay, so look at this. So from Isaiah all the way to Malachi, this section is the writings of the prophets. Now, of course, what also they have done, they have broken up this section into 2 major sections, what is called the major prophets and the minor prophets. Okay. But that God did not arrange this. This is how scholars and translators arranged it. So when they took the writings and they strung them together, this how, again, not saying it's right or wrong. All right. It's not all right, but because what I'm going to say is the voice of the prophets actually begins here. And I'm going to show you that in a moment. So if you want to look at what, so if you're reading through, you got a Bible plan where you read through, you're going to come to Isaiah first, and then you're going to read Jeremiah, and then you're going to read Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. Now, this is pretty much, actually, Ezekiel and Daniel about the same timeline. But this is how, the dating. In other words, Isaiah dates before Jeremiah, so forth and so on. But then when you get to Hosea, you're actually going to jump back nearly 200 years before Isaiah, and then you're going to start at Hosea. Now, the reason why that's important, and I know it because having studied, read, and come to know these things, then I know that, okay, now I'm reading a time before Isaiah. Now, why is that important? This is when God starts his prophetic voice, okay? When God starts his prophetic voice. Excuse me. God starts his prophetic voice, and the prophecies is warning Israel to turn from their wicked ways. Okay? Warning Israel to turn from their wicked ways. So let's look at now how that pans out. Okay? So you can see the date here, which was the BC dating. So if you start with Jesus and you start going back, the numbers get higher. Okay. That's just the way, again, how they did that. If you start at Genesis, the numbers start high and they come lower till you get to AD 0, which is Jesus. Okay. But now watch this. I want to show you just as an example, and you're going to see why I am going this route. So we're going through the books of the Bible, and this is how they are dating them. And actually, these would be, if you were reading, this is an approximate date. So the building of Solomon Temple, about 900 BC, right? Oh, Oh, excuse me. Okay, so as we're getting further down, we're going to come to, and by the way, remember, Chronicles, First and Second Samuel, Chronicles, and Kings are around the same period of time. But look at this here, Obadiah. Okay, now they have him at about 853 BC. Okay, so this minor prophet. Now there's debate as to if he comes much later. All right, so that's why I say these are timelines that are approximate and not necessarily exact. But anyway, let's go on. We keep coming, and let me show you why I say that too. Look at here. So if you look at Hosea, and then here's Obadiah, and Obadiah's around the same time as Jonah. So here, as they are arranged in the Bible, Obadiah would come much later. All right. Okay. So now look at this. You have Amos right here at 766. All right, 766. So Amos pops up at he's one of the first word prophets. Now he's considered a minor prophet. Okay, he's considered a minor prophet, and but again, these are not necessarily exact. But you know, notice they got Amos, and then you got Jonah here. And remember, I told you they had Obadiah right around this time here. But that's between the scholars. Now I want to show you something, just so you can see where is dream. I thought I liked this here, but I'm looking for Jeremiah's prophecy, and then you got Daniel. Okay, Daniel's. Where are they at here? So 588, right here. This date's what I'm looking for. 588. Now, the invasion actually happened before, because Jeremiah is there, but Daniel is one of the first refugees, okay, or captives that are carried off. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's go back to this date here when we said that. Where are they at here? It shouldn't be Isaiah. Okay, you see Isaiah. Okay, Hosea, Amos. Okay, Amos right here. Now, why am I focused with this here? To understand prophecy. So let's first understand the timeline of prophecy. So Amos, and let's go back to our little clock here. So Amos is here when in reality, Hosea. So this is the scholarly debate right here. Okay, so Hosea, Joel, and then Amos, right? And when we look at the timeline, and the reason why it's important, because some 178 years, and this is going to be the most important thing. I won't argue with the scholars here. What's important to understand is about 178 years, 180 years, or 200 years, God begins his prophetic warnings to Israel. Turn from your wicked ways. Okay? So again, you see 766. And then as you start coming down, Here are the prophecies of Isaiah. Okay, here are the prophecies of Isaiah. These are words. So before we get to Isaiah, you have Hosea, Jonah, and Amos. That's why, and the reason why I'm saying this is that the voice, the prophetic voice, to me is what's important. The prophetic voice, the utterance, the prophetic voice. And you kind of understand what God is saying. So then when you get to Isaiah, right, even though he's considered a major prophet, his prophetic voice, the prophecies are getting more and more intense, okay, that God is warning. Now, the difference is, and we'll get to Joel. Where you at, Joel? Where you at, Joel? Let me see here. Let me come back. Jonah, where you at, Joel? No, Joel should be back here. How did I miss Joel? Okay, here's Joel. At 8:35, I'm missing some prophecies here, and okay. Oh, Obadiah. Remember I told you Obadiah is right here at 8:53. At 8:53. And so I'm going to have to kind of revise 8:53 minus 596. What did I say? And I'm going to explain this in a minute. You can see why I'm doing all of this. 588. Okay. 588. I'm going to get this together here. 588. All right. So I'm sorry. So I got to make a little smaller calculation. So, because right here let's go back, at 8 BC, so some 265 years before the fall of Jerusalem. That date that I gave you was when Jerusalem was actually conquered. That Nebuchadnezzar came in and he conquered Israel. He came in, he actually conquered Israel. Now, what's important about this, okay, is that God, some 265 years before, right? Some 265 years before. So you start with Obadiah, okay? And again, this is debatable, but how about Joel right here at 8:35? And we're going to get to the prophecies of Joel, okay? We're going to get to the prophecies of Joel because his prophecies are talked about a lot. His prophecies, 35. His prophecies, Jesus quotes his prophecies. The famous, in the last day I'll pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and young men will dream dreams. Okay, so right here with Joel's prophecy at 8:35, 247 years. That's what I'm looking for here. 244 years before the fall of Jerusalem. And so all this time, all these prophets, Isaiah, the focus of the prophecies will be the coming fall, the coming destruction of Jerusalem. But also, you have in these prophecies, and we will get to a lot of them, okay? We will get to a lot of these prophecies, all right? Also, you have, I'm going to come out of this for a minute, okay? Well, let's go back because it's important to understand here. So you look at all of this. Here's Hezekiah. We see all of these. Really the prophecies are doomsday prophecies. Okay, so that right around here, Jeremiah pops on the scene. some 20 years before Nebuchadnezzar begins to invade Israel. And then you have like Daniel and Ezekiel, who were the first ones to be carried away captive. And then, so all of these kings, and then you get to the point here where this here, very important date here, very important. 588, Jerusalem is sieged. Okay, so all of the prophecies leads to this point. The Babylonian, everything changes for Israel at this point. There had been changes because of their wickedness, but here, Israel is completely wiped away. And this is right here, the siege of Jerusalem, right here, this right here. And then if you go back and you read, and then look at 586, the fall of Jerusalem. And what Nebuchadnezzar did was he built a wall, like an army wall around Jerusalem, and just sat. They couldn't leave, they couldn't go. So their food supply ran out. They began to starve. There was all kinds of stuff. It was a brutal takedown. Okay, now all of this was the prophecy. Now that's important. That's why when you read like in Matthew, he one of the things he said in the genealogy was from let's go back. All right. So I can have time to go over this again. From the prophecy. Now this is going to be important. You say from I think it's from Abraham, or was it from Abraham to David, something like that, 14 generations, from David to Jesus, 14 generations, all these different generations, right? But he said to the Babylonian exile. Now, why is that important? Because this prophecy here, okay, it's given in Daniel chapter 2. Daniel is a part of the first invasion. He's carried away. And so in Daniel chapter 2, you see now God gives Nebuchadnezzar this dream. And then Daniel interprets this dream. And then the book of Daniel has a series of prophecy. But this prophecy here is a prophetic picture during Nebuchadnezzar's day, because God gave Nebuchadnezzar the dream. And it is a prophetic picture from Nebuchadnezzar's time right up until the second coming of Jesus. And so all these phrases are important to understand. It's just that sometimes people don't really fully explain them. And what this image is four, let me see, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 5, I'm sorry. 4, 5, yeah, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm sorry. 5 world dominating kingdoms, starting with Babylon, and then it ends up with the beast, or the man of sin, or some people call him the Antichrist. And then what you'll see in this vision is that doing that rock, which represents the kingdom of Jesus doing the days of the feet right there. And you kind of, I don't know if y'all can make it out, but doing those feet, you see those toes kind of broken off, but they represent kingdoms. During that time, and we'll get to this, Jesus will come and smash this image, which is a figure of a human form, or man's time on the earth. So right here, we have the prophetic picture already laid out for us. Okay, we already have it laid out. 4 of these kingdoms have already come and gone. So Babylon, Median Persians, the belly of thighs and bronze, leg of irons, and the feet of iron. I mean, the only one that's left to arise is the feet of iron and clay. But this image is a prophetic image, and that becomes very important. So that all prophecy, okay, centers around this. If you want to understand today, what's going on right now today, you have to start with understanding these prophecies that lead up to this point. And of course, next week, because I'm out of time now, we'll get back to why Jesus' prophecy against Jerusalem is so important. When he says that your house is left to you desolate. But now let me just say this too, that with this prophecy also, because it gives us a timeline, we can chart where we are prophetically. Excuse me. We can chart where we are. So, for example, if you were, and Daniel does this, and we'll get to his, he does this. He actually looks at the prophecies of Jeremiah, and because he operated in the head of gold kingdom, and then he also went to the Mede and Persian, or the chess and silver. He was able to chart by prophecy where he was. Now, same thing. If you're in the Matthew 24, where were we in Matthew 24? Well, that would have been the legs of iron of the Roman kingdom. But I'm going to get into this more next week. As I said, we're going to take our time and really unpack this. So, all right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And I will see you next Sunday for